We're here with David Ondrik to talk about his installation, Inheritance. And we'll dive right in.
Great.
So David, tell us how this work came to be, the origin story of what we have here.
So this came out of my father's terminal brain cancer in 2014. And, it wasn't made until 2017, but it's my attempt to process and express that grief and grieving process of loss and the experience of caring for someone who had a terminal illness, who then died, and then the whole entire aftermath of that. And I think of it as inheritance because it really brought out how much I have inherited from my father, both not only like the stuff, and probably even less the stuff, but the worldview, the mindset, the education, the value system, the interest in all sorts, like it's a broad term. Even garbage, like terrible political opinions and arguments and and the sort of weight of these things that you sort of take on, both from parent, but also even broader from culture and generations.
And by stuff, you mean like some physical objects?
Yeah, the physical
inherited.
Objects. Yeah, I mean, there was, he was in the midst of a move to Alaska when all of this happened, and so like his physical possessions were all in a storage container in Alaska that then came back to me in Oregon, and it was like, wow, I've just inherited somebody's life of objects. And like now I have to sort of process these both actually, like what do I want with, how am I going to accept this thing into my life or not, as well as this was this thing that mattered to him. What does that mean to me? What am I doing with it? And so some of those objects, especially the hand planes, he was an amateur carpenter, and so the hand planes like felt more precious to me, like they had sweat marks from his hands on them, and but I'm not a carpenter by a long shot. So I thought about
you're a maker.
Yeah, definitely a maker, and so I ended up using those to create these photograms. Rather than to create like a cabinet, I created a giant photogram out of them, with them as the things that cast shadows. So like a photogram is a cameraless photograph, and they go way back, the earliest experiments in the 1800s with photographic chemistry and paper. Fox Talbot in England put plants on these papers he was trying to test out, put them in the sun. Photogram is what you got. And so rather than putting a plant or a hand or contemporary artists, I think there's a bear in the other room.
Yeah.
Instead of an object, I started drawing with them because the early versions of this, where it was like scraping plane, were really boring to look at. So thinking about how could you actually draw with light? Again, going back to that sort of 19th century, Talbot called photography photogenic drawing at first. So how could you actually draw with light in these light-sensitive materials? And so I started moving the planes around and casting the shadows and actually having a mobile light source that in this case a Zippo lighter, because my dad was a dedicated smoker, cancer, but would use that Zippo to create and mold the light and draw with them to create these.
And how did it grow to be such a beast?
Peer pressure.
So you started with something of a modest size, and then you just kept building and building.
Right. The sort of push in grad school, and you could do it as big as you can while you can.
Yeah. And not always good advice, but in this case, I have to say, it works. It becomes such a presence.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to be antagonistic towards that sort of advice, rather than make it small, you should make it absurdly large.
Right. That's right.
But it does create that enveloping experience. It can swallow you because it is much bigger than you and me, and it's sort of to replicate that sense of the loneliness and the grief and the depression through these sorts of experiences, I think translates to a much larger piece like that.
So you've started with something that's specific to your own experience, and use that for your process. But then what you've ended up with is something that your intention is to create a space for people to take their own griefs or their own things that they're working through, to kind of stand in front of the piece or kind of encounter the presence of this object, just kind of make a space for contemplation.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, everybody suffers and is suffering right now, especially through this pandemic, and so like the specific story of my father is sort of a very small thing in the bigger picture, but I've had this experience through it, and if that experience being translated, expressed visually, can help other people find camaraderie or relief or a reflection of like, yes, I'm having that too, then that little bit of suffering is worthwhile, is meaningful, as opposed to just this sort of personal, like, pay attention to me, I have a sad story, which is
it's very different.
Yeah.
It's very different, and I think the abstraction kind of lends itself to that. You get sort of a lot of the feelings or emotions are kind of present there, but each person can take their own story into it.
And I think I like non-objective abstraction for that, because I feel like it really, if you let it, it can be a mirror, not a window. And like, so what do you bring to it? Like, I know what those black things are to me, I know what the drips are to me, but that doesn't mean that I have to be that to you.
I don't want to only focus on this large installation though, because the show is made up of 3 parts. So we have this mammoth, and we have 3 kind of smaller versions. And you were just talking about like the videos that are sort of shaped like a doorway or window, and I feel like these really evoke that for me, that they're exactly the size of a doorway that you could sort of step through, which is nicely loaded with meaning if you want it to be.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about those.
Well, it's looking on how to get this similar experience to this in a package that's more accessible, but that also, so they're, most humans, that is about the size they are. It's about the size of, it's not exactly the size, it's about the size of a normal household doorway. And so it's, you really can, if you are willing to, you can sort of sit yourself in front of it, like really in front of it, and just sort of envelop it as this sort of passage to a different place, a psychological place, a meditative place, maybe even a spiritual place if you're willing to let it be that. And so it's again that sort of, a 16 by 20 photograph or even a 20 by 24 photograph isn't bigger than you. It's hard to get, you can lose your peripheral vision on those and just be in front of them. And so it takes that kind of scale. And then to have them up and down, that makes them like us. If it was horizontals, it then becomes again a window or of course it's artwork. Let's not pretend it's not. But it does. You could imagine walking into that, and maybe don't want to, but it's like, it would be possible based on its size and its orientation.
You talk about grief as something that you need to sit with and confront and encounter and kind of not let it sort of fester unknown, but be something that you really pass through.
Yeah. And that was what was, working this experience you have, grief can feel very lonely and isolating too, which then just keeps compounding the situation where like, well-meaning people want to cheer you up, or maybe less well-meaning people are like, aren't you over that by now? And what they're really saying is like, let's ignore this and sweep it under the rug, pretend it didn't happen, and put on this facade. And it's like, you don't heal ignoring it. Most things you don't heal ignoring. And so, but it can be hard to sit in front. You may not feel like you deserve the space or the attention, or people, you might be worried you're making people uncomfortable. Maybe you are making people uncomfortable because you're a super bummer. And they came here to have fun, and it's like, and then you sort of start to question your place. It feels very isolating. And so this was, again, my sort of visual manifestation of that, but also to then say like, yeah, it is. Why don't you come sit in front of this and like...
Permission to sit with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's another side of the content too I want to talk about very quickly, which is if you're coming to this and you're not bringing grief, which if you have made it through 2020 without that, then
Congratulations.
Congratulations. You can just have a purely aesthetic experience with this. There are these like ecstatic moments of form and of like drips and of black holes and places to get lost. Yeah, so you can kind of bring whatever is going on with you, and like you said, kind of have it mirrored back to you.
Exactly. And definitely I've had colleagues who have said, like, what if I want to experience it on that way? Does it have to be this like heavily loaded thing? And it's like, well, no, I just,
Yeah.
Sure.
One thing that I love about your work is your titles. So you're presented with abstraction. That's the first thing that you see, but when you go to investigate what these are called, the titles are all sort of rich with meaning. I'm curious about your titling process, if it's something that happens, like if there are things happening in the world while you're creating a particular piece, if that's how the title happens, or if it's something that you place on it afterwards.
So usually afterwards, and especially for these over here, I was really looking for, I guess what you could call double entendres. So like gravity can be the scientific term, but also we use it as the gravity of the situation. You're gravely ill, a flood of emotions. A flood can be a deluge of actual water or something more, again, scientific. And then accretion is this like accumulation. I think it's used mostly in terms of black holes, that they have an accretion disk of hot gas around them, and that's actually how we detect them. But it also then is like you accrete all of these experiences and things and life. Like every day you're gathering and collecting things that are in your orbit. So it's like trying to make all of those things.
So giving
exist.
people just one word to kind of bring something into the piece.
Right. And then for these, the titles are much more specifically about what's specifically visible in them as actual photographic images.
So this is the third part of the exhibit. These are you've called them male-made disasters.
I'm not sure I'm
Intrigued.
100% on that, but we twist ourselves into a lot of knots that man-made, mankind, all of these things sort of encompasses everybody, but like males have made these disasters happen. Mankind is not, like I have. Like people like me have made these things happen. So like trying to own that in a way. And so we have there's two specific political events, the White Power March in Charlottesville and then the protests for justice for Breonna Taylor in Louisville. There's a wildfire shot from California, which of course, those wildfires are the way they are because of the way we have made policy decisions on how natural resources are managed and climate change. And then there's a riot squad macing peaceful protesters on the left, and the one on the right is the hardest to see, but it's actually a pile of AR-15 bullets. And that, of course, is the preferred weapon of the mass shooters at schools. So, and all of those things are things that are perpetrated by men, right? Like men made the stupid environmental decisions. Men want to fight over the right to have AR-15s. The cops macing the protesters were all guys. There weren't a whole lot of women in Charlottesville. I couldn't say that it was completely men, but and the crybabies yesterday were all mostly men too, right? So like
interesting. So these are like a lament for these things that are happening.
Definitely.
And your process, like intrinsic to your process, is a kind of destruction. So when you look at these and you just kind of feel from the surface, you get the sense of something that was pristine has been destroyed in a certain way, and that this is now what we look at.
And it's the sort of like idea too that you can you have to look at it. Like nobody wants to deal with the forest. Nobody wants to really deal with why are a certain type of person taking a certain kind of weapon that's available and perpetrating these crimes with it. Why on earth, are specifically to today, why are some protesters greeted with pepper spray and rubber bullets and others are like the barricades moved aside for them? We don't, I don't know. We haven't had a good track record of looking with that and sitting with it.
We let it flick on our computer screen and then we turn away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I love art and I love the power of art and I think it's important, but I don't know that anybody listened to Woody Guthrie songs and stopped poverty, but I still feel like I had to do it.
You have to try.
Yeah.
So anyone walking down 4th Street can see your, I don't know what to call it. It's not quite an installation. You've wrapped part of the building.
Yeah, it's like some kind of mix of Christo and I wrapped the dumpster.
You've wrapped the dumpster. We're so glad.
Yeah. But I love this, something that JR talks about is that when it's in public, it's public. People can walk by. I mean, they can't on this because it's different, but his are on paper. They can walk by and tear off a piece. Their dog can pee on it.
Right.
Whatever. It's public.
They can add their own contribution.
Right. They can sign their name to it.
That's all we have time for. We should thank everyone for tuning in and spending time with this lovely human. And if you're in Bloomington, you can come and see this show and have an experience yourself.
I have to do the thank yous.
Yes.
Thank you to you and Mia for inviting me to have this exhibit in the space. It's fantastic. I'm really excited to see it up there, and I appreciate, and Chaz, all your help with the back end. We should look behind the curtain and see Chaz who's helped us out so much.
Yay!
And I'm sorry that, it would obviously be really dumb to have an actual opening, so thank you for coming to this as well. And if you are in Bloomington, I do hope you'll come check it out in real life, because that's how it's designed. So,
thanks everybody.